Hello, I'm Oral, and welcome to this very special edition. My guest is a young candidate on the PFP party, Mr. Patrice Gumbs, right?
Yeah, Patrice Gumbs. Yeah.
Why I say Patrice?
Yeah, well.
Sorry.
No problem.
Good. And you, the number 4?
Number 4 on the Party for Progress. And thank you for having me here, Oral. Really appreciate it.
It's good to have you because you're a very dynamic young man. I know your father well. And you were working for government for, what, 12?
It's going to be 11 years September, actually.
Time goes fast. Man.
Yeah. And actually, you said you my dad. I think a lot of people in this whole process of campaigning, a lot of people have mistaken me for my dad. A lot of people know him, Patrice Gumbs Sr. Worked for years in Lance Radio, which became Antelecom, and then UTS, now Flow. So I've gotten that mistake a lot. And I mean, it helps, particularly in this campaign period, to have a popular dad. But I think one of the things I always try and say is to make your own path and carve your own way. But I think he's played a large influence in my decisions and how I've gotten into politics, my mom as well. And I'm here to talk about that and kind of my candidacy for the upcoming elections.
Well, your father's a very cool, very light guy.
Yeah.
Outside the station, I saw a taxi driver stop you.
Yeah, exactly. But it's funny because, even too in St. Martin, I tell everybody, sometimes we don't realize that our parents' actions speak before we speak. So we outside the station downstairs, the taxi driver said, Junie. And I was like, Junie? He was like, you don't know your name is Junie? I said, he said, isn't your name Patrice? I said, yeah. He said, Junie. I said, I've never been referred to as Junie. He said, aren't you Patrice Gumbs Jr.? I said, yeah. He said, well, Junie. I say, well, okay, fine. If it works for you, it works for you. But, that's the beauty of St. Martin. It's small enough that people kind of know you and they feel a sense of security and safety, which is, I think, one of the challenging times about this election, how much has changed based on what's been going on. But it's also big enough that you have variety. You have a sense of cosmopolitanism and things for everybody to do. And I think for me as a candidate, those are one of the things which you really want to see sort of the old St. Martin kept, but also brought forward in a way which is sustainable and to bring about development. So currently now, as you know, I'm Minister of Rummy since June 25th. It's a position I took up where previous to that, when we swore in on May 3rd, I was actually Minister Plenipotentiary. And one of the things that I've always said, with my years in foreign affairs, I always tell people, you could know a lot, but if people don't know you and if you're not a likable person, it's one of those biggest challenges. And I think downstairs what I saw today was a proof in the pudding that really and truly sometimes your actions and who comes before you speaks before you as well. So yeah, like you said, I spent, when I first came into government, 2013, I was senior policy advisor in foreign affairs. Then I became director in 2020. Same time I ran for the very first time in the same Party for Progress. And, one of those things that I've said, I spent so much of my professional career working in foreign affairs where it's really about people. It's about management. It's really big picture, very abstract. It's looking at things from the point of view of, I hate to use words sometimes, a helicopter view. You see the big picture of what happens in St. Martin, and you take a lot of different ideas, you put it together, you package it, and you sell it outside in foreign affairs. So the question came to me several times, but what are you going to do in Rummy? It's like, you spent your whole career, you studied politics, studied international affairs, you studied all these big world concepts, and you're going to come back home and think about roads and gutters and trenching. And I'm like, in the end of the day, you don't necessarily have to be a technical person to manage a ministry. It does help to some degree.
Right.
But I always tell people as a manager, it's about basically managing people skills and bringing people together. So that big picture view of seeing what something should look like, you kind of have a vision that I think many have lacked when they take the helm of Rummy, is that they just really focus on the very small things, contracts, trenching, and they don't understand how, case in point today, we have a cruise ship in port, and we decided still to go ahead with, for example, the roadworks on the culvert. Many ask the question, but I mean, how are you going to do roadworks now when you have a big cruise ship? And I'm like, trust and believe, the right decision was made. We look at the bigger picture. It's the only way I can think of is big picture, given what I've been doing all these years. This was all the different factors taken into consideration, you make a decision, you stick to it, and you put provisions in place to mitigate whatever can possibly happen. And I think a lot of that big picture idea of you take a weight of all the different factors and you execute, that's something that I think, coming from foreign affairs, that big picture vision and strategic planning and project management, that has helped me a lot in terms of trying to structure VROMI and bring a bit of sort of a long-term vision to the ministry. And definitely something that I'm championing a lot of. Coming out of foreign affairs, going into VROMI, what I've seen too, you see a lot of things around the fact of it's very execution-based. Working in government too for so many years, a lot of the things that, for example, the Prime Minister would speak about when it comes to big picture, so sustainable development goals, UN this, environmental this and that. When I got into VROMI now, and you kind of know because you work with different ministries all the time, there's a disconnect between those two things. So I think what I've enjoyed, there are challenges for sure going into very technical ministry. What I've enjoyed is trying to kind of translate that big world picture into having everybody see the value of their sort of smaller tasks in the bigger picture of what it means. And I think that's something that St. Martin definitely needs going into this new election. You need vision, you need strategic long-term planning, and you need persons who can actually manage. It's not about always technical knowledge, it's about basically how can you identify your personal weakness, mine is technical, but I have the strength to bring people together, and you hire your weakness, and you support and promote and encourage your team. And that's what makes a good minister, a good politician, a good leader.
In case you've just joined us, this is a special edition, and my guest is the Minister of VROMI, and he's quite an interesting young man on the PFP party list number 4, Mr. Gumbs. And why is it interesting? You hold a record. I don't even know the record you hold.
Yeah, probably for the most jobs. Most jobs in the last half of a year, for sure. You're
Minister Penitentiary. You're Minister of VROMI. I mean, it's amazing. It's fast.
No, I mean, it's interesting. I was telling somebody, I think at this level, people can hold odd jobs every couple of months, but at this level of to hold Director of Foreign Affairs, then Minister Penitentiary, then Minister of VROMI / Deputy Prime Minister, and hopefully with the people of St. Martin support, another ministry, if not this one, or member of parliament in a couple of months, you have a record for probably the most casts. But I think it's also testament to the skills I think I possess in terms of you can put me anywhere and you don't necessarily have to know exactly the technical things, but you know how to manage. And you're a people person and you see the strength in people and you see the weaknesses and you bring that stuff together, and that's how you create a strong team.
No, that's very important because you got to deal with people every day.
Yeah.
And if you can't manage them, then it's a problem.
Yeah, but it's everybody, it's not everybody you like, it's not everybody's opinion you appreciate. Sometimes your opinion is also not the one that's the best. How do you bring people together to make something that's consensus and everybody can agree and work with it? And I think what I've seen now in the last couple of years is that we're so focused sometimes on our ego and what we want personally. And one of the things I've been saying as well as Minister of VROMI recently, everybody wants to have the rules applied generally, but don't apply the rules to me. And this is this idea of consensus has to be made to bring this country forward. If we all sit down and individually want our personal sort of agenda, our personal interests respected, but then complain to the government after when all of these personal interests are respected and executed, then personal interests always clash. What is the best for the greater good? And I think that's a strong message of this election. You're seeing it a lot. I think with GEEBE, you've seen it, how for all these years, personal interest means that nothing has been done to improve energy infrastructure. So right now we're at the point where we kept kicking the ball down the road. The football kept rolling. And here we are now where you have a very direct result of lack of decision-taking, lack of management over a number of years to just make a decision for the greater good. You see it now too in the road works. Like I said, we just finished, we're matching the midst of men on the road working hard since 6 o'clock this morning. I was with them. Road management, it's that we do so many things and we don't look at the big interest, we don't follow up. So here we are now, years later, the culvert is blocked. What should have been an empty hole, for example, allowing water to pass through, was filled with debris, dirt, Frito-Lay's chips, bottles, because we haven't actually done the correct things in terms of government, in terms of getting the stuff, having the road fund, road management, drainage. These are all the things that come up, and it comes from the fact that we are so focused sometimes on politics and being in power. When we get in there, we don't actually know how to govern.
What surprised you as Minister of Rumi when it comes to GBE?
I think one of the most interesting things, and I will say it, is that this whole discussion around, as Minister of Rumi, there's this, you're in charge of issuing permits. And it's a big discussion that we were having actually in Parliament the other day. You're responsible for issuing building permits. And the building permit process, there's no requirement to consult GEBE, for example. At the same time, you're in charge of spatial planning and infrastructure. And in the concession agreement of GEBE, GEBE has that the government has to inform them when a development goes above 500 kVA. So the responsibility of that would then come onto the Minister of Rumi. The argument has now been that, but there's no requirement, for example, that I as the minister have to involve GBE in the building permit process. Indeed, and very correct. But there is an obligation to inform GBE when a development goes above a certain amount of energy consumption.
Right.
So because now these two are separate arrangements, a responsible minister would bridge that gap and say, okay, they're not part of the process, but this is above a certain amount. I need to have that discussion between them and see what can happen. And this is the problem we get. We look at things very black and white, but don't look at the fact of the implications in responsible planning. So you can't be in charge of building permits and spatial planning and not marry those two concepts, because what's happening now is you have so much going on in terms of development, but there's no big picture plan for how to support this development. And we've spoken to GB about it as well. They've said it several times. They don't get told what's happening, how they find out, they drive around, they figure it out for themselves. And again, with every new development comes an additional requirement in terms of water, electricity, infrastructure that they have no idea about. So what I found interesting is that as the ministry responsible for infrastructure, you don't see how building permits and your energy and your infrastructure overall is intrinsically tied. It's very much separated and everything is very much like ad hocly done. And I think that's one of the biggest surprises to me is that, you can sit there as a former minister and say that there's no need to tell GBE, but you're in charge of spatial planning and environment. So there's a disconnect there.
In case you just joined us, this is a special edition with Mr. Patrice Gumbs. Mr. Gumbs is Minister of Rumi. He's Deputy Prime Minister. He recently held the post of Minister Plenipotentiary. We're here to speak with him. I'm going to ask you this question, Minister. And the last time I asked a politician this question, they refused to answer it, but they went on to become Prime Minister. How old are you?
Oh, I'm 35. Yeah. I'm actually, I tell everybody, at a certain point, I think once I started to get that kind of age thing around 25. And by 30, I was like, wow, 30, at that time I started to lose my hair already at 29, 30. Now at 35, I'm like, yeah, 35. It is what it is.
You're on a political party, PFP. You're running at number 4.
Yes.
It's a party with basically all young people below 50 years old, right?
Yeah. The oldest person is, I think, 43. And the youngest person is about 27 or 8. Yeah. So it's, so it's a relatively young party. But I think one of the biggest concerns people have had is that, how can these young people run a country? And I tell everybody all the time, it's, I think what we personally may lack in terms of longevity and experience, you get advisors and you get support. And I think, like every political party, there's a face, and there's also people who give you support and advice who are older, who are much younger, some who also have no political experience. Because again, being a politician is not about necessarily knowing every single thing. It's about knowing how to work with different people and work smart. So you really have to build a team around you that supports you and builds on your weaknesses. So I think our age is one, maybe that some might consider to be a negative. I consider it a very big positive because it means basically that I think very often when youth, you have a lot of energy and you also have a lot of desire to change things. I think when people get to the point where they're 50, 60, 70, even 80 sometimes, you see that it's really not about change. Mm-hmm. It's more about, okay, let me just sit back and try a thing. And I think for us, it's really about, let's change this now because we're young, we're energetic, we just came out of school, some of us have been professionals for some time. So we kind of still have the optimism of very young people, but oftentimes with enough experience, it's kind of not to know what needs to be done and to do it in a way that's more sustainable than just wanting to come sit down now and say, you know what, I made what I do and I just want to make some money.
So you won't take a guy over 50 in the party, PFP?
Not necessarily. I mean, like I tell everybody, you know, we're very open to everybody, but I think what has happened is that people are often afraid of change. And I tell Paul all the time, you know, I think people see young people, they think inexperienced, they think, you know, they don't know what they're doing. And to me, it's a question about people have to be willing to realize that what has been there all these years isn't necessarily working. Yeah. And you cannot use the same door to get through and think you're going to end up in a different house. You can get to the same house again. So I tell people all the time, you know, it's a question about your age isn't the problem, it's the way how you think is the problem.
You're saying that's probably the strength of the PFP then? Young people bringing about change in a very positive way.
Yeah, but I think it's also the fact that most young people are willing to do things at a very young age that people who are older wouldn't necessarily want to do anymore. The older I've gotten, when I first came back when I was 25, there's things that I would do then I wouldn't do now. Right. And the older you get, the more comfortable you get, the more set you are in your way of thinking. Right. But there are people who are much older than us who advise PFP. Sometimes, I mean, we've gotten advice from a 92-year-old once upon a time, and they're 92, but their ideas of what they think we should do actually match somebody out of college. So the problem is not necessarily your age, because, you know, there's some people who are younger than us as well who have very strange thoughts about, you know, yeah, go in there, man, do your thing, but, you know, we know that you're going to teach, but just save something for everybody. And I'm like, there's somebody who's, I think at that point, they were 22 or 23 when they said the comment. And I was like, you know, being young doesn't mean better. Being young just oftentimes means you have a much more aggressive and much more radical mind to make change happen. Yeah. But I think for us, it's about basically, what are your ideas, even if you're 21 or 51 or 92? And if they mesh with PFP, we will definitely consider you as a candidate. It's not about age.
You've been with the party from the inception, right?
Yes, actually. So the party started as a concept many years ago. If I recall, it was 2014, 2015. I was actually first consulted as one of the first non-founding members back in 2015, 16. So right after kind of the concept started off to come on board. And I've always liked politics. I was in student government, I was in a debate club, very much in community work. But I always knew I wanted to get into politics. It was several different things. It was, you know, I wanted to be a priest and a politician at a certain point. I wanted to be a doctor and a politician, a singer and a politician, and politician just kind of stuck after a while. But no, I always knew I wanted to do it, and I was one of the first that was approached by the PFP, kind of before it even was the PFP. And then we kind of formalized the name and everything in 2019, and then we announced our launch 2019 for the following Friday, and then that Sunday the government fell. Right. And then it all kind of went into what is now PFP, and here we are today. And
this is the third time that your party is contesting parliamentary elections.
Yep. So the first one was a snap, right, as we know, back in 2019, which was 2020. Then 2024, which was the first full-fledged sort of regular election of the country since 2014. And then here we are now after a few months, here we are again at another snap election, which I think is unfortunate. But I think the decision to go to an election was needed.
What would you say? Because a lot of people who were in favor of young people got disappointed because when you look back at the history of those responsible for governments falling the last 10 years, they've been young people.
Young people. And I agree. And I think what it boils down to is that if you're young, like I said, you're very radical, you have ideas of progression, but you also need to have a team around you who tells you, listen, this person is just blowing air up your you-know-what, And
I think your party leader really holds that party together because she's firm on that, how she's going to govern and not bring down government just for frivolous things.
Exactly. And I think it's unfortunate because, even in the formation of this new government, she took it upon herself to sort of act as that leader for all the young people within all the different parties within our coalition. Telling them, people are going to come at you, but, turn to us, come to me, come to me, if not, we're all in the same age group, the younger ones. Come to me, I'll have a discussion, I'll support you, but be very aware they're going to offer you all kinds of things, And it's oftentimes things which, unfortunately, they target persons who are vulnerable in whatever way possible you can think of, be it financially vulnerable, be it emotionally vulnerable. A lot of people go into politics because, they have something to prove, or they were teased when they were younger and they want to now feel, pride is a thing. If you can't temper and keep your pride and your ego in check, you can go down a very slippery road. And I think, unfortunately, the older persons who know how to manipulate, and the younger ones too, there's young ones who can manipulate, but the person's always responsible, at least in the last couple of falls, a person's very seasoned in politics. And they see persons who, want something fast, they want a certain lifestyle, they promise them something that they know they can't get, and then they fall victim to this kind of manipulation, unfortunately.
Let me ask you this. You're 35 years old, right? You was director for Foreign Affairs, former Minister Plenipotentiary, current Minister of Finance, and Deputy Prime Minister.
Not finance. I still come with my fingers. I don't think I'll get that portfolio very easily, but yeah.
Sorry about that.
No, it's fine.
Romy, Deputy Prime Minister. At 35, number 4 on the PFP list, what do you want people to know about you?
I think one of the things and I'll go back a bit to what you said earlier when it comes to my roles, and I think my professional career has been very much education, and then these kind of what people would perceive as very high-profile jobs. And granted, my first job ever was interning at the commissioner's cabinet when I was 18 years old. So I haven't necessarily had the most sort of small job experience. And I think a lot of people look at me and think, why would I vote for this guy? He has no idea about, the everyday struggle of people. He has no idea about how to govern or anything. He just kind of knows a textbook. I think that's something that I've heard quite often. And even too about PFP as a whole, how we kind of may seem somewhat out of touch because we're so educated and who our families are, whatever, XYZ. And to everybody, it's unfortunate to think that way, because if you actually get to know the party, and me in particular, we're actually some of the most humblest people you ever meet. And we're actually telling people all the time, it's not that we are sitting down on this altar preaching to anybody that, oh, we're so holier than thou Boy Scouts, but we see it already that if you don't change how we govern and govern based on integrity and just the most basic values of humility, and I can tell you, people look at me, and I think people see me in the paper, he's here standing up at the UN or with the Prime Minister, and they think, oh, he's so out of touch. I'm not that kind of person. I'm the most sort of humble person. You can always reach out to me and talk to me, but I don't ever want to be in this position for the sake of just being in a position. I think for me, I came to do this with a purpose. The purpose goes beyond me. When I first ran 2028 to everybody, my objective is not for you to elect me, to know me, to get something done. I want to create a system where if I drop down dead today, or if I'm not running again, the system lasts. You don't need to have Patrice Gumbs there to, get a building permit or to get your taxi license. The system that I want to create and PFP wants to create is outside of us. So to think that we want to, or I want to come in here to fill my pocket, or that I am just on this sort of ego trip, far from the truth. I think one of my biggest things is people get caught up so much in positions and titles and forgetting that serving is a privilege and an honor. It's not that coming there and see what you can get. And I think for me personally, it's, if you have a concept of me, of our party, reach out to us. I mean, I have the same phone number since 2018. It didn't change. You know what I mean? So I don't do this whole number change thing. I'm very people oriented. You gotta at some point realize though that a politician isn't somebody who's a yes man. The long-term interest sometimes means that you say no, but you gotta vote not for your cousin, your best friend, or somebody who you just like. Being liked is great, but what is the person's message? And my message to people is that, look beyond what you think we are and read what we've been saying, listen to what we're saying, and realize that we come with the best interest and with humility. I think that's very important.
In case you've just joined us, a special edition here with Minister Patrice Gumbs, and he's the number 4 candidate on the PFP, Party for Progress, right?
Yep.
And progress we need really bad these days.
Yeah, and I think, and the thing is, I tell everybody, and we had this discussion so many times within our party, because people always equate or think that progress means building. And that progress means, oh, we need to have a water slide. Oh, we need to have a water park. Oh, we need to have, I don't know, Chuck E. Cheese or and I'm like, those ideas of progress are what you looked at in the 1980s development idea. So progress means you have, 20 houses and everybody have 10 cars and everybody has a laptop and a TV. That's one definition of progress, but that's a definition that doesn't take into consideration everything else. So for example, progress also means, proper infrastructure. Progress also means educated society. Right. Progress also means a decent wage people can actually live on. When I look at, for example, the minimum wage in St. Martin right now, we're hovering around just below $5. And I always tell people when I see elections come about, 2,000 more dollars in your pocket, 500 more homes. And I'm like, okay, how are you going to get there? And I get it. People like to hear more. And more always is the way, and that's kind of why we're at this level of progress. We always see progress as being more. But progress really is about also social issues. Yeah. So how educated is the population? Is it safe? Is there a decent living? It doesn't just mean having a bunch of houses around the place.
You want to see that your population is happy.
Yeah. Progress has to be developed, has to be wider than just me living on a nicely paved road, but there's sewage water running through my yard. That's not progress. Because the nicely paved roads lead to a condominium that you can't ever afford. And the lack of education means that probably you're going to always end up voting in people who can manipulate and use you. And not education means that you have a bachelor's and master's degree. It means education basically about your people in your country. Right. If I talk to the average person, sometimes some of them know, who's who, what's going on, but some people who you are surprised, some people have no idea who's even the prime minister, how the system works. So then when somebody comes around, they're vulnerable and a little something goes in their hand, they don't know any better. So the premise is if we keep under-educating people, we keep on using people. And that's what we have to come and address. And one of the biggest things that we have as PFP is we have to educate our population.
What are young people saying to you as a young man?
I think it depends. I think generally speaking, young people like PFP. I think a lot of them, and particularly from those who are generally more educated, I think one of the biggest things I've heard from a lot of young people though is, man, y'all gotta go out there and do something because everybody's so used to this fafa and the fanfare and the rallies and the chicken leg and if y'all don't come out big, so it's trying to, and we always tell they tell us to, y'all have to find a way to bridge that traditional style of campaigning with what y'all are trying to say. So how do you, and one of the biggest recommendations we've had is that we have to find a way to bring down these abstract concepts that we tend to have as a party, we can say very freely, to make it tangible. because young people like us and they believe in it, but they're telling us, listen, but at the same time, like, this person is promising them this. And when I break it down slowly and tell them, like, for example, you know, they're promising this, but it's not going to happen, and they're like, you're right. I think a lot of young people like PFP. What they want to see, though, is PFP be a bit more tangible, I think, in terms of how we deliver.
So they want to, like,
we have to work on that a bit more.
and touch PFP.
Yeah, and I think to some degree that works very well in St. Martin. People like this idea of the cult politician, you know? And I always tell people, cult politicians are great if they deliver. But a cult politician who has you and could touch their hand, but then, you know, ain't even giving you crumbs off the table, that's the problem.
They love that touch, the hug, and the this and that, all the BS, and they're happy.
But I think if you can find a balance between that sort of personality politics and really delivering, which a lot of countries have done, and I think we did it for quite some time in the beginning in our development in the sort of 50s, 60s, 70s, and then somewhere along the line where we would ensure that at least a slice was given off the table, not even the crumbs are being moved down the table now. So this cult personality politics isn't working if you're not necessarily supporting and uplifting the people. And that connection between cult politics and actually giving back to the people has been completely broken. Okay. It's really now, in my opinion, cult politics to make you want me there and manipulate me to keep me there, but then nothing is really happening for the people.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what are some of the areas that you personally feel that, hey, I would love to see these things taken care of?
So one of my key things, and I've been focused on this so heavily since starting, we spoke about it very, very briefly in the beginning, we need a poverty line. And the poverty line is the baseline where you say, this is where we need to be as a people if we actually want to afford to live in St. Martin. And people always say, oh God, another study. And I'm like, yeah, because if you want to go towards the Netherlands or anybody for funding, they're going to first ask you, okay, where's your data? Yeah, but go in and shop there, because you can shop the price. I said, you can't tell somebody go in and shop and see the prices because they need data. And I've told everybody again, you know, we're never, let's say, for example, we get to the point, we have a poverty line. It says, okay, in St. Martin, everybody needs to make 3,000 guilders. Random number, don't hold me to it, don't bring me to court. 3,000 guilders, let's say, as a fictional number where we have to go. We're not going to jump now from 1,100, 1,200 guilders, or actually no, 1,700 guilders to 3,000 guilders one time. But you have to then know that this is your benchmark. What can I do to get there? And that's what progress is about. The small steps towards where you ultimately know you need to be. So that's one thing I'm very focused on. The second thing, for example, for me is agriculture. So during COVID, my parents, what they did, we all, you know, everybody sitting down home, nothing to do. We really got into agriculture. And I mean, in a way which I never thought we would. We got chickens. We started raising chickens. We had chickens. We had eggs. We didn't have chickens. We had chickens who made eggs, and we're eating those every day. We started to sell it and make a small little, you know, just kill some time in the time. My mom was doing vegetables, stuff like that. And I think I've always told people there's this idea that we're going to go back to this idea of agriculture of 1940s, 50s. That part is gone. We're not those people anymore. We need to stop lying to people that we're going to ever do that. But I think what you need to do right now is empower farmers towards innovative ways of agriculture. So right now there's Sage Farms. And I mention them too because I really love the work that they're doing. They actually are doing vertical farming. So a container with sort of sliding walls of different things, and you plant and you do nutrients into the water, stuff like that. And that's kind of where you have to go, because if you think about it, we don't have much space on St. Martin. That's one. We also have, relative to the rest of the Caribbean, we have a very high cost of operation here. So how are you going to compete with, let's say, a Dominica? Planting a potato here in St. Martin will cost more than a potato in Dominica. Planting, you know, big imported, heavily subsidized imports from other countries coming here won't necessarily make the market. We have much more expensive potato than Dominica or, let's say, Mexico or China.
But would you support subsidizing local farmers?
Of course you can, but, and I think it's something you have to do for sure, but I think it goes beyond subsidies. It also goes about how do you then within your whole planning, support them for market access. Also for resources. How do you, for example, the whole picture. I think everybody say, oh, here's $10, we support agriculture. Okay, where's the incentives towards water? What is your sort of tax break or whatever for persons that have, and I had this as something I focused on the last election, rooftop farms. Mm-hmm. We don't have much space, but everybody after Hurricane Irma is doing flat concrete roofs. How do you say, okay, listen, you have a flat concrete roof, this neighborhood has about 50 people living it on this street, whatever it is. If you give your roof towards urban space, urban farm, everybody can plant something there for themselves, we will reduce your GB bill in terms of water, because obviously the water for this farm is coming to you. Government will take off X amount off of your bill as a subsidy, as well as doing, for example, support monthly markets, whatever, that bring you in, and also to support, for example, agreements between Anguilla, St. Bart's, whatever, to import those things. And again, that foreign affairs aspect of realizing that St. Martin doesn't trade. So when you want to actually export vegetables and fruits, whatever, to different countries, you need a trade agreement. So that expertise in foreign affairs comes in to say, listen, if you want to do this beyond sort of subsistence, small scale, it will cost you a lot, but you also need to have a structure where to do it within the global economy. Right. And I think what we have to first focus on is stop looking at exporting, because we're never going to export today for tomorrow. We have to build a small subsistence agriculture economy here first.
So for local consumption.
Yeah, for local consumption, even if your own household. I mean, we don't buy eggs anymore, for example. So that takes off a bit more off of what we would normally would spend. And that's how you have to go about it. And then my third thing has been a lot too is alternative energy, in particular renewable energy. And it all ties back into what I talk about in terms of the cost of living with the wage and also agriculture, subsistence agriculture. In the Caribbean, for example, this region spends about 20% of its GDP, of what people's disposable income is spent on energy costs. So if you find a way to look at how can we mitigate those costs by having alternative energy, so solar panels, it actually can mean that the $5 we make now every hour as a minimum wage, if you're spending, I don't know, $2 out of that for energy, and then you can save, you can actually spend instead of that $1 instead, that other $1 means that your $5 actually has much more value than it did before. So it's about addressing the poverty line, food security, and also energy security. As we see right now, GB is completely reliant on fossil fuels. How do you bridge those three together? You have to cut energy costs, because energy costs actually completely drive up the cost of living in St. Martin.
Exactly. Well, Minister, we out of time. You have 2 minutes in closing. All yours.
Yeah. Well, thank you for listening, St. Martin. Thank you for having me, Oral. I would like to remind all of you that come August 19th, please put your trust in the gold standard, that is Party for Progress. I am Patrice Gumbs, candidate number 4, asking for your support, asking for your buy-in to progress, to this idea of holistic development, not for a select few, but for all people of St. Martin. So come August 19th, vote the gold standard, vote PFP. I'm Patrice Gumbs, number 4 on the slate. Thank you.